And what I want to talk about is just to follow up and kind of piggyback on some of the things that have already been talked about, and again, just to pick back up from what I talked to you about the first thing this morning, and again, going back to the discussion about what we do as personal injury and accident lawyers. And again, when I say that, I'm talking about everybody here. It's nothing that we're not here to say that we've got the only method or the only systems that work. Everything that we talk about over the years, somebody has mentored us or taught us, or it's something that we learned along the way. So again, I'm not up here, and nobody that's presenting today is here to say that we're the end all be all or hold the the keys to the kingdom or anything of that nature. These are all things that I'm sure that you do in cases, and that you're already doing in cases, but it just always helps to hear it again, to reiterate it, to review it, to learn it. And something that I'm, again, the things I want to talk about are something that I'm very passionate about, and the attorneys that I work with are as well. I want to go back. I first met Matt Glover 10 years ago, around 10 years ago, at a CLE seminar, continuing legal education seminar in Tuscaloosa, and met Matt and talked to Matt about some cases that we had in the office. And Matt and I, formed a friendship and a working relationship, and we've been working cases together for probably over 10 years now. And again, the things that that I want to go back and again and talk about and build on, the things that Co talked about, the things that Matt talked about. Matt talked to you about getting that great result. Co talked about cases that could go from a case that you're going to turn down and reject to a case that gets a great result. Well, the thing that I want to reiterate, and Matt and Co both touched on this, it's not just a great result for you, it's a great result for your community. The insurance industry, big business, big corporations, they've done a great job of packaging and marketing tort reform, packaging and marketing attorneys as ambulance chasers, unethical. And again, to touch on the things that Matt and Co talked about, what we find is it's the it's the other side. It's the insurance defense lawyers. It's the companies oftentimes that are manipulating evidence, that are hiding evidence, that are out at the wreck scene, manipulating the investigation, and doing whatever they can get away with to either minimize a claim or deny a claim altogether. Now, once again, nothing that I say or anybody says here today is meant to knock or criticize big business, big industries, corporations. Again, we all know that is part of the driving force behind the economy, or the economy thriving. But again, what we're talking about is situations and circumstances when you ask the question, what's beneath the surface, going back to the comments that we get, ambulance chasers. Again, what's causing all this? Why is the ambulance there to begin with? And through the discovery process, through the investigation in cases, you'll find oftentimes that there's a conduct of a company where, again, they're placing a higher value on profits and productivity over safety and human life. You'll find that when you take depositions of corporate officials, corporate reps, and many times, even though they may be charged under their own policies and regulations, they may be charged with the responsibility of safety director, and they can't, they're not familiar with their own policies, their own rules and regulations that are in place for safety, that are in place to protect human life, that are in place to prevent injuries. They can't tell you that, but they can tell you how much product they're producing at any given time, how much profit they're going to lose if a machine, a piece of equipment, a truck is not running a certain number of hours. So again, it's something that that we're very passionate about, is not only getting a good result for your client, but exposing situations, again, where a company is placing that higher value on profits and productivity over safety. Now, another thing that has, that I like to, share with other attorneys, or remind attorneys that may be practicing in a different area. Maybe you're not handling personal injury and accident cases on a regular basis, but you have a thriving law practice. You're going to have clients that are going to need that service. And again, the tendency can be, especially I think oftentimes for somebody that's a relatively new lawyer, or again, not practicing on a regular basis in the area of personal injury and accident law, it could be a tendency to just take a look at an accident report and look at it and say, well, you're at fault, or I'm sorry, but it appears that your mother, your dad, your brother, they were at fault in this wreck, and there's nothing, that we can do. But again, through the discovery process, through the investigation process, you'll find that's not actually the case. Now, something else too I want to back up and talk about, again, whether you handle personal injury cases or not. Again, you're going to have clients, you're going to have people that that need that information. They need to know, look, if your mother, your father, your brother was hurt seriously and injured, again, one of your clients, and they're in the hospital, or worse, the family's making arrangements for a funeral, they need to know that there's typically going to be an insurance company that's out on the ground building a case to deny a claim or to minimize it. So it's so important to get a lawyer involved as soon as possible. And again, that's something that, again, no matter what type of cases you're handling, I just think it's a good practice to convey that information to your clients. Another thing I want to talk about in evaluating cases in your office, Matt and Co. have talked primarily about, again, commercial truck wreck cases in the context of a tractor trailer, an 18-wheeler. Matt touched on this, but you want to also be aware when it's a case involving some type of company vehicle, a service vehicle, that may not be the typical, again, the typical car wreck case where your client's going to complete their treatment, their medical treatment, and then send a demand letter to the insurance company. I mean, you know, as we all know, most clear liability car wreck cases, you're not going to go into litigation. You're not going to file a lawsuit immediately. Now, again, each case is different. Typically, in a commercial truck wreck case, an 18-wheeler where you have substantial injuries and damages, it's best to go ahead and file that lawsuit right away. But you may overlook, again, a surface vehicle, a vehicle that is tied to a small business in the community. Again, on the first glance of that wreck report, it could just appear to be a, you know, it may not get your attention that it's a commercial vehicle. And it's a commercial vehicle tied to a company that's going to have a lot greater liability, a lot greater risk, much more to lose than other types of car wreck cases. So again, be aware of that. We years ago, we had a case where it involved a man that was injured in a motorcycle wreck, and again, it was a surface vehicle. But and again, at the first review, it just appeared to be a clear liability case. You're not going to file a lawsuit. You're going to try to work something out with the insurance company and negotiate a settlement prior to. But again, further review, further investigation, the amount of injuries, the amount of damages, as Code talked about, we wound up bringing in a series of experts, and in that particular case, a accident reconstruction investigator was retained, an economist, and a life care plan. But again, that was a case that on the surface, it was not a tractor trailer. It was not a 18-wheeler, but again, it was a corporate vehicle and a company that had a lot to risk, and so it warranted litigation and going through the discovery process and building the case up for trial, and ultimately a successful mediation. And that's going to be the next topic that David's going to present, is working the plaintiff's case up and mediating it. But again, that's something I wanted to touch on. Also, you know, as Matt and Co have talked about, there's commercial truck wreck cases where, again, on the surface, the temptation or the tendency might be, it's a clear liability case, rear end collision, the damages, the injuries may not be at the level that you would typically look at in litigation. So the tendency may be, you know, let's not take the time, the energy, the effort to go through the discovery process. This is just a rear end collision and, you know, again, a simple negligence case. There's no real heat in the case, but Jim Jacobs, again, Matt introduced Jim earlier. I'm sure everybody here knows Jim, but Jim and Matt had a commercial truck wreck case several years ago, and again, on the surface, it appeared to be a rear end collision. Maybe there wasn't a lot of damage. It's a lot of a client with a lot of pre-existing injuries. So the temptation could have been, well, let's not file that. Let's just go through, you know, let's not take the time, the energy, the effort to go through the litigation and discovery process. But again, in that case, after investigation, depositions were taken, we learned that the truck driver, as Matt touched on, had some medical issues going on. And because of those medical issues, the trucker was having a tendency to be late and slow on his runs, not as profitable as the company would like. So instead of saying, hey, we know you're going through a hard time. We know you have this medical condition. We know things are hard for you right now. So we're going to give you some local runs. We're going to give you a lighter load. We're going to make it easier for you. We're going to make it safer for the public. What did they do? Tim, is that what they did?
Just the opposite.
What did they tell him?
Put a lot of pressure on them.
And the pressure was, if you're late,
You're losing your job.
we're going to fire you. Now, what is that? That's a company placing higher value on profits and productivity. We recognize, we know you're having trouble making your runs on time because of your medical condition. We know that. But instead of telling you to slow down and be careful, we're going to tell you, you need to speed it up. So, again, we would have never known that without the discovery process. And again, Matt and Co have touched on situations and scenarios and cases where the log books are missing, or the driver or the company has cooked up the log books, or they deny having a electronic control module or GPS, and in fact the investigation, the pictures show that, and they've either hidden evidence or destroyed evidence. And again, we would like to say this is the exception, but you see it over and over. In fact, there's been cases where the trucker will give a report and say, I was ran off the road. Another vehicle swiped me and ran me over and ran me off the road, and that's why I swerved and this wreck. It wasn't my fault. It was that driver that swiped me and kept going. Well, through investigation, you can get, and the discovery process, you can get old wreck reports, you can get documents from previous wrecks, and you'll find out in some cases, well, that same truck driver gave that same story pretty much word for word in another wreck. And guess what? The insurance company knows it. The trucking company knows it. And what do? When they find out, do they come forward and say, hey, we're sorry, we didn't know he'd given this same story twice? No, they keep going with it. So again, it's so important, as Matt talked about, to chop that wood and to get to the heat in the case, to get to the bottom of what caused that ambulance to show up at the scene to begin with. Now, and I've put together a presentation I want to go through that.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
I hate to interrupt you. I'm
No
trying to
problem.
refresh my recollection. Was it this CLE last year with you or one of your groups talking about a company that had a policy for the drivers to call the company within 10 hours after they had a collision or something like that?
Yeah, basically they'll put it in their driver manual
But it was here, yeah.
that they are to call
Before they talk to anybody? that they need to call a home office, right?
Yes.
That's what the guy said this morning.
Yes.
Okay, well, I was late getting here.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm sorry.
And yeah, and you'll find that out sometimes through through the manuals, the policies, and it can come out in depositions as well. And you see it show up where their first call is not 911 or to call for help. It's to call the safety or the insurance company back to the office. They want to get their people on the ground as soon as they can. They want to get their investigator, their insurance adjuster, and oftentimes their attorneys at a scene as soon as possible.
Well, obviously, y'all have used that in the past. Does it bring a lot of heat in the case? I mean, how do you use it?
It does, but again, it's like any other situation. You have no perfect case. I mean, a lot of what we're doing today is talking about the conduct of the other side or the insurance company, but we all know, as Judge Davenport alluded to earlier today, our clients don't always take our advice, and again, I've yet to see that perfect case. So again, yes, it does bring heat, but we just have to balance it, or you just have to balance it out with the other aspects of the case, because again, oftentimes there's problems or issues with our cases.
Every case is different, I understand.
Exactly, but yes, it can, as you can imagine, when the pieces of the puzzle start coming together, and a judge or a jury finds out that the log books were taken, or the log books were manipulated, or the electronic control module was manipulated somehow. And again, as Code talked about earlier, it can be done legally. I mean, they can legally, destroy evidence. So again, that's why it's so important to get a personal injury accident lawyer involved as soon as possible to build the case to a point where if they do manipulate evidence, if they do destroy evidence, you get the exfoliation charge, you get the presumption that they're trying to cover something up, they're trying to hide something, and it wasn't just destroyed or done away with in their normal course of business. It's something they were doing to cover up bad conduct. And again, what I want to do, this goes through, again, most of the things that Matt and Co have already talked about, but I find in times, especially for me, it helps for me to see different examples, another example. And again, this is just another example of a case that would have been turned down, but once you start the investigation process, examining evidence, going to the scene, you find out a situation where, as in this particular case, the trooper, and again, let's keep in mind, their responsibility, their duty is to protect the public, get the roadway clear, get medical attention to people that need medical attention. It's not necessarily to go in and do a thorough investigation always and determine, I mean, they're just doing the best they can with the information they have and what they have in front of them. This case here, you see the skid marks, the point of impact. This is a 18-wheeler wreck, and unfortunately, the other driver died in this wreck. And so, as Code talked about earlier, the trooper basically only gets one side of the story. But you ask yourself, what are these skid marks doing? What are they doing there? What are they doing at that point in the road? You see the point of impact there. Well, you start, again, asking, what really happened. And as Matt talked about, you go further, you start in this particular case with an inspection of the equipment, and you're looking at the service of the brakes, the steering mechanism, the lighting, the tires, the horn, all the things that are required for safety. Now, we have here a document from the Department of Public Safety Motor Carrier Safety Unit, or Safety Division, Safety Unit, and you find out in this particular wreck, there's several violations, and that actually the brakes are out of adjustment. They're operating without a periodic inspection, and it basically rendered this vehicle out of service. This vehicle shouldn't have been on the road to begin with. The next thing you want to look at, and asking yourself, why are those skid marks there? Why did this wreck happen? Why did this lady that is now deceased, that get to go home to her friends and family, and again, there's no good explanation for them other than, you pulled out front, you did something wrong, and you see that. Again, you see that over and over in accident reports. So you take a look at the load inspection, and it's a log truck that's 93,500 pounds over the limit. Brakes out of service. Why are they doing it? Because they're on their way to a paper mill and they're more concerned again with the profits and productivity over the safety of their driver as well as the other people on the road. Now let's take a look at the driving records. Matt talked about the physical qualifications, the toxicology. In this particular case, you see the driving violations of this driver. I think it was about 13. 15 tickets, 15 overweight, 10 moving violations, 3 wrecks, and 1 suspension. So you have a company that's putting a driver on the road with a load that's 93,500 pounds over. The driver's got a history of running the vehicle, overweight, and again, it's supposed to be out of service because of the brakes. So you think the trooper knew this when the trooper did the wreck report? No. Now, and again, Matt talked about this earlier, and you may not see this often, but that nugget does come up from time to time. This is a Social Security disability application of a commercial driver, and out of his Social Security disability application, I'm not supposed to drive. That's part of the reason, and this didn't go with that particular case, but Matt talked about drug testing. Sometimes they'll drug test, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they follow the DOT regulations. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they follow their policies. Sometimes they don't even, again, as I talked about, they don't even know their policies. But they can typically tell you how much product they're delivering, how much profit is being made. But in this particular case, the corporate rep testified they didn't test this particular driver because he's a pastor. And again, the pastor testified that he had positive test results in the last 3 months. And again, these are drivers that are out there on the road endangering you, your community, your family. And so, again, it's not just something that we do to get that result for our client, ourselves, but also it's very important for the community. And it's something I feel very strongly about to get the word out in the community that, you know, that's a big part of what we do. That's a big part of why we went to law school, why we became lawyers, why we became judges, to bring about justice, to get to the bottom, to not just accept, hey, that's just another ambulance chaser. That's a frivolous lawsuit. Well, it's easy to say things like that. But is it really a frivolous lawsuit? Is it really an ambulance chaser? I mean, how do you think the family of this woman feels when they find out that this company has that kind of driver in that situation out on the highway? Do you think they feel like it's a frivolous lawsuit? And so again, that's what I want to encourage you to to think about these things. To again, not ever let anybody get their lip poked out at you, or they're going to do it. But get their lip poked out or try to degrade the good work that you're doing out in the community to bring about the truth, to uncover the truth. And, again, no matter what kind of propaganda is out there, no matter what you face, as Matt talked about, the insurance defense attorneys, they're not just going to gladly turn over this information. In fact, they're going to criticize you. They're going to degrade you and say, hey, it's a waste of time. Again, we know all about your client. He had a neck surgery 5 years ago, or he had a back surgery 10 years ago, and you can get all this stuff, and we can go through all this discovery, but there's nothing there. They're gonna do everything they can, and oftentimes you'll find the public and insurance adjusters and people out in the community. It's going to be the same way, again, because they don't have the information, they haven't been given the truth. So I think that's part of our responsibility to talk with our clients about it, to talk with our friends and family about it, to let people know when you're in these situations, look, this wreck, it didn't have to happen. There's a reason the wreck happened. You see it in the context of workplace injuries. The number one thing, again, just in the same type scenarios as the commercial truck wreck cases, the number one thing the company is going to do is say, hey, it was his fault. He didn't do this, he didn't do that, he didn't chain this up or lock out, tag out. They're going to find something. But again, when you get below the surface, and again you start chopping the wood and getting through those tough, that tough work, you're going to find that's not the case. There's more to it. So again, I appreciate everybody being here and being with us. And again, like I said, I just want to encourage all of you to keep doing what you're doing. Yes, sir.
Two questions. First, you talked about the lack of truth sometimes between the corporate executives, and the profits and productivity.
Sure.
And obviously that would come out in a deposition or at trial as well. What has been your experience as far as the truck drivers themselves? Do they testify pretty honestly, or are they under a lot of pressure, or what?
I'm glad you brought that question up, because it's really the same applies in injury cases and death cases as the same way it applies in every other case. It's across the board. Sometimes they're truthful and sometimes they're not truthful. I mean, we've seen cases where or a case that comes to mind, a death at a factory, a plant, and you've got the boss, basically the corporate bosses in the room with somebody that's still employed.
Yeah.
A small town, really nowhere else for the guy to get a job making the kind of money that he's making, and you can see it on his face. That's why it's important to strategically videotape depositions, because you can see it on his face. He's under pressure to testify and to toe that company line, and you can look on his face and he knows it's not right. And the last question in that particular deposition was, you're under a lot of pressure. You've got a good job, and you've got a family, and you want to keep that job. And he was honest about that.
Yeah.
Okay? And you hope in the cases where they're not being honest, you have another witness that can expose they're not being honest, or you've got documents that can show. For instance, in the case that Code, some of the cases that Code was talking about earlier, that they had the black box, the electronic control data that pinpointed the driver's speed. In his deposition, he's not being honest. He's in fact, he kept reducing his speed. However, the scientific data, the scientific evidence exposed that he's not being honest. So again, it's just like any other type of case, whether it's a divorce, criminal case, whatever. You have witnesses that are honest and witnesses that aren't. But you bring up a great point. Oftentimes, they are under pressure to keep their job.
What is your opinion as to who lies more, the corporate executives or the truck driver?
I think it's a situation where, to some extent, it goes hand in hand. And to me, at least, and this is just an opinion, and I don't know if Co and David and Matt would feel differently, but my opinion, you just oftentimes have a culture in a company, and again, just each company's different, and it starts at the top. And it's just like any other organization. The employees are only going to do, and again, I don't mean that to sound derogatory against hard-working people that roll up their sleeves, but again, they're under pressure to pay their bills, and they're going to comply with what the company dictates or mandates, and oftentimes they're just under-resourced. They're being put in situations like the example that I talked about with a man with health issues, and he's being asked to do something that he can't do. But he needs it. But where else can he go get a job with his health condition, making the kind of money that he's making? He can't.
How much do those truck drivers make, them long-haul truck drivers?
Well, some, it just varies, and it depends on what kind of operation they're running. But there's some guys out there that are making 6 figures or high 5 figures. They're getting paid, based on the miles they run and the amount of hours they put in and so forth. So it's just like anything else. It varies, but there are some that are making some really good money.